So Dr. Selner-Wright got her undergrad at Notre Dame, master's and PhD at Catholic U. But more importantly, so we both brought some Joseph Pieper tonight. So Joseph Pieper is, if you struggle to read St. Thomas Aquinas, Joseph Pieper is your guide. And he really helped me to understand what philosophy was and who St. Thomas Aquinas is in a way that I never would have come to on my own. And two things I just want to say about Susan Selner-Wright. So Joseph Pieper is a Catholic philosopher in Germany, and he says this. He says, there's a big difference between being a philosopher and studying philosophy. And he says, actually, sometimes studying philosophy can be a detriment to being a true philosopher. And when I entered seminary, there's 2 years of philosophy studies, and I didn't know why at first. And I thought it was just going to be, okay, here's Immanuel Kant, here's Friedrich Nietzsche, here's Plato and Aristotle and others. And what I didn't learn from Pieper at first, I learned secondary, but what I learned from you two is that philosophy is not merely about learning what other people thought. Philosophy means having an attitude of wonder towards the world that you and I live in. It means a stance where we look at the world around us and we're amazed. And where most of us live our busy lives and we kind of jump into emails and traffic and all the things we have to do day by day, the person who is a philosopher is someone who can step back from that and is amazed that there is such a thing as a tree. There's such a thing as wisdom. There's such a thing as the human heart. And I learned that in my 2 years at St. John Vianney in philosophy. So these two, Susan and Terry Wright, I have a huge debt of gratitude to. They really taught me that, and it's a joy to have her here tonight to share some wisdom with us. So let's welcome Dr. Susan Selner-Wright.
Thank you, Father. Okay. So Mutual Admiration Society, I'm sure some of you have had this experience where your work, there are moments where you suddenly see, oh my gosh, this is why this is worth doing. And I remember the first time I saw a man who I'd taught in seminary preach. It was Father Jim Thermos as a transitional deacon. And I just wept to see this beautiful man preaching just beautifully and knowing that I had had some tiny part in getting him ready to do that. So you can just imagine what it's like for us to be here. So who here comes to the noon mass on Sunday? A few of you. Okay. All right. So that's our mass. We sit back by the baptistry. If you look at Rachel, this is what Rachel looks like. In church, she usually has 3 scarves over her head. She is the most reverent person I know. And she just does not really emerge much. Okay, so, and we'll see how long she lasts at this. This is pretty good. So I often start by saying about myself that what is most formative for me has been being married to another philosopher who's a very generous, loving man, and having 2 exceptional children, one of whom is exceptionally bright, and the other of whom is developmentally disabled, but emotionally and spiritually pretty much a master. I tend to talk about Rachel quite a bit because I can't embarrass her. And I tend not to talk about my men because I can't embarrass them. So if I seem to leave them out, it's that's the only reason why. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about Christian receptivity And I want to be receptive to whatever it is that this raises up for you. So I asked Father Sean to tell me when like 22 minutes have gone by from here. And then I'll wrap up and we'll see what this stirs in you. I'm being very brave. I want to talk about Christian receptivity, and I decided to start by talking about Scripture. All right? So, Father Brian, be very patient with me. If he leaps up to the mic to correct me, yeah, that's okay. All right. So, I was thinking about the typical thing when we think about Mary and about Christian receptivity is about Mary's fiat, right? And her conversation with the angel Gabriel, right? Everybody with me? That's sounding familiar? Okay. But it struck me that the story of Zechariah and his encounter with the angel, which being a good Catholic I sort of knew about but hadn't really read directly, right? Why would we do that? Offers a really interesting contrast to what happens with Mary. Okay, so Zechariah, shall I just read it to you? Father of John the Baptist. All right, in the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord blamelessly. But they had no child because Elizabeth was barren and both were advanced in years. Right? So I tend to think about that as a woman from Elizabeth's point of view, but here's Zechariah's. Now, while he was serving as priest before God, when his division was on duty, according to the custom of the priesthood, it fell to him by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And the whole multitude of the people were praying outside at the hour of incense. Okay, so Zechariah is a big deal, right? He gets to do this thing that hardly anybody else gets to do, and everybody else is just waiting outside while he's doing it. And there appeared to him an angel of the Lord, standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And Zechariah was troubled when he saw him, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him what angels always say, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer is heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John." Okay, and then Gabriel says all this really interesting stuff about John, which somebody should give a whole talk about. May I suggest that? But I'm going to skip right to Zechariah's response. Okay. And Zechariah said to the angel, "How shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years." And the angel answered him, "I am Gabriel, who stand in the presence of God, and I was sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. And behold, you will be silent and unable to speak until the day that these things come to pass, because you did not believe my words." Wow. Okay. And then 6 months later, Gabriel goes to see Mary, gives Mary her good news. She also pushes back a tiny bit, right? Says, "How can this be, since I do not know man?" And the angel explains it to her, right? So what's the difference between Zechariah and Elizabeth? Why is Gabriel so mean to Zechariah, right? Who clearly is just very surprised, right? And he says, right, "How shall I know this, right? I am an old man, my wife is advanced in years. We can't conceive a child," right? What's the difference? The difference seems to be that Mary asks a question, right? She says, "How can I conceive since I do not know man?" Right? She asks a question about, well, here's my understanding of reality, angel, right? And in order for me to conceive a child, there has to be a man involved. So how's that going to work? And the angel answers, right? That question. Zechariah doesn't ask a question, right? he says, how shall I know this, right? I can't wrap my brain around that. That's impossible, right? Because I'm too old and my wife is too old, right? The difference, it seems to me, is a difference of receptivity. Zechariah rejects what Gabriel is saying. He just says, that's impossible. And Mary doesn't reject it. She says, what? Right? And then she's able to receive more, and it is explained to her. Reality, right, is itself a creature of God, right? And Zechariah thinks that he has mastered how reality works. So when this angel comes and says something very unexpected to him, he's not receptive to it. He thinks he already knows how reality works, right? Where Mary has been formed in such a way that she is still able to be docile, right? She has docilitas. She's still able to listen to something even though it doesn't really make sense, right? She doesn't just reject it. She asks a question about it. She wants to understand it, right? So one of the things that I think that contrast is teaching, at least it's teaching me, is that receptivity is something that has to be cultivated, right? Mary was formed in such a way, right, by Joachim and by Anna and by the Father, to have this receptivity. And for all we know, Zechariah had a version of it too, right? But Zechariah's been around for a long time, and he's got a very high position, and he's been getting used to, I am the priest, right? I am the expert at this. And he's become filled enough with his own position that he's lost that receptivity, right? So maybe he did have it, right? But he needed more work, right, to be able to maintain it. That strikes me as very interesting, right? I mean, we all have the temptation to take our achievements and hold them as, this is the part of reality that I have mastered, and there is nothing more to be said about that to me, right? Well, that's in fact never true. We're just finite creatures. Our mastery over anything is always radically partial and inadequate, right? But we have to cultivate the humility to remain receptive to what else there is for me to learn. The reason I have my peeper here, right, is because he talks about this docility, docilitas, which he's always riffing on St. Thomas, but his riffing is very interesting. So, rooted in St. Thomas, Pieper says, docilitas, is the kind of open-mindedness which recognizes the true variety of things and situations to be experienced and does not cage itself into any presumption. Right? Isn't that interesting? Docilitas is this open-mindedness which could recognize, I've got a lot of expertise in this particular area, but that doesn't mean that I've seen everything about it. There's always going to be more for me to learn. And it might be that some upstart who's coming at it from a completely different perspective is going to say something that I'll be tempted to just dismiss as stupid, but which is actually helpful, right? Pieper goes on, a closed mind and know-it-allness. I wonder what that is in German. Know-it-allness are fundamentally forms of resistance to the truth of real things, right? If I did know it all about something, right? Well, that's just impossible, right? For a finite being like me, right? I might know enough, right? I might know more than someone else, but I never know it all, right? So a closed mind and know-it-allness are fundamentally forms of resistance to the truth of real things. Both reveal the incapacity of the subject, the knower, to practice that silence, which is the absolute prerequisite to all perception of reality, right? Now, Father Brian's been talking lately about the importance of silence and the necessity of silence to prayer. This is kind of a little bit different angle on it. Pieper talks about the necessity of silence before reality. We have this impulse to want to kind of master things, right? And we meet a new person, for example, and we're immediately categorizing them, right? And trying to figure out where they fit into the big picture, right? We shouldn't do that, right, is what Pieper is saying. We should be silent before them. We should let them show us who they are, right? And maybe ask questions that help us to learn things about them, right? But when we meet a new person and are instantly figuring out who they are, well, the chances that we're getting that right are slim to none, right? Okay. The same thing is true with all other kinds of reality, right? That we need to be silent before reality and let it speak, right? It's sort of like the difference between having a conversation with somebody. Have you ever had this conversation? Where as you're talking, you see their eyes kind of glaze over, and you can tell that they're just thinking about what they're going to say when you stop talking. Have you ever had that conversation? Yeah. Okay. Some people are like that with the world itself, right? Don't tell me what the nature of something is, right? I'm just going to tell you what the nature of something is. Okay. Part of the way this is coming up in our culture, and one of the tensions that we have as people who take our creaturehood seriously, is this drive to self-invention, right? And then these weird questions that now turn out to be these minds, like, what is a woman, right? Who knew that was going to turn out to be such a minefield, right? Okay, how did that happen? It should be that sort of question is something that, well, we just let the reality reveal itself to us, right? But we've got ourselves twisted up into these knots where some people very sincerely think that each individual has to figure out for themselves what it is to be a woman, right, if they're female, or what it is to be a man, right, and what the meaning of these various organs is, right, and what the appropriate use of those organs is, right, and then we have all these tensions about that. Because we think that we have to put meaning onto those things instead of receiving, right, from them a meaning. Okay, I'm trying to keep this kind of at a 60,000 foot level, right? If people want to pull it down to the nitty gritty, we'll see in the questions. I think what we learned from Mary is that it's okay to ask questions, right? Like, well, do women have to be girly? Do they have to like pink, right? If you're big into skateboarding, does that somehow make you not a female, right? Of course not, right? So asking those kind of questions, that's very good, right? What's a problem is when we just want to impose on reality, right? And not let it have any authority over us. Okay. A struggle that we have, and all human beings from Adam and Eve have had this struggle, is to accept reality, to receive reality as it is, and not as we wish it were. Right? we've all had this experience, right? When we first got Rachel's diagnosis when she was a baby, and I realized that so many of the things that I had been expecting without really articulating them for myself, that those things just weren't going to happen, right? Or that they would happen in ways that would be completely different from what I was familiar with. There was a period of weeks, maybe even months, where every time I would see a woman with a baby, I would think, that one is normal. And just be filled with this jealousy, right? Why does she get one that'll go to college? And this was horrible. It was just horrible to find myself thinking these things, right? An allegedly mature person, right, thinking such horrible thoughts. And what I've realized over time was that I was struggling to receive reality as it was, and I had to give up, surrender, and grieve the reality that I had thought it was going to be, right? And I had to receive this about myself. I am someone who has horrible thoughts. Right? That was hard. But to receive it then is to figure out, okay, well, what am I going to do with that? Am I going to stay there? Is that it? Am I just going to become this bitter, jealous person? Right? Or am I going to find a way to integrate this fact about reality that I wish was not so and move forward from here? Right? And that's the thing about believing that we are God's beloved, well-known children. One of the things God knew was that I was going to struggle with those terrible thoughts, and that I was going to have this kind of crossroad moment where it was like, all right, am I going to choose a life of bitterness, or am I going to absorb this, figure out the ways in which it's actually going to feed me, right, and allow myself to become that person, right? God knew that. And he took what was an occasion of just great suffering and made it an opportunity for really serious growth. And the reason it was serious growth was because it wasn't what I wanted, right? If I'd been given what I'd wanted all my life, I would still be 18, I would have perfect skin, and right, there would be a very different person before you, right? I clearly have not been in control of this, right? That kind of receptivity, right, to accept that reality is not always what I want it to be, but that doesn't matter, right? I now have a choice. Do I accept that and integrate it and move on, or do I just spend my life rebelling against it, right? Those are the choices. We see that kind of thing. People have that kind of difficulty all the time, right? You know, if I suddenly found myself attracted sexually to somebody who wasn't my husband, right? Well, that would be distressing and disturbing, right? But how should I deal with that? Should I just pretend that that's not true? That's probably not going to work too well, right? I'm going to need to process the fact I have this attraction that I really don't want to have, right? So what should I do about that? The culture says, well, you need to be authentic, right? So just go with that, right? You follow that through to its, see what happens, right? Well, we know that's just not true, right? That's exactly what I shouldn't do, right? Right. Of course, I'm giving counterfactual. Somebody told my husband earlier what fabulous hair he has. So, right, this is clearly a counterfactual here. So to be receptive to something doesn't mean to just give in to it, right? But it does mean to recognize it about myself and to recognize, well, this is something that I definitely need to work on. I can't just pretend that it's not true about me. I need to think about, well, what is going on, right? And how am I going to act now that I've realized this in such a way as to continue living an integral life, right? So I'm probably going to avoid this hypothetical person, right? Yeah, I really wasn't expecting to talk about that. This is the problem with the example machine. The stuff it comes up with sometimes is a little, wow, really? Okay. Right. Or somebody might wish about themselves, I wish I was not prone to depression. I wish I did not have a brain that the wheels were greased, that when there's too much stress, or when I'm thinking too much about trauma in my past, sludge just starts going through my brain, right? People who contend with serious depression wish that were not so, right? Okay, but we can't just wish it away. We have to acknowledge it about ourselves and recognize, okay, I need some help with this. And then think about, well, try to find the kind of help that is actually going to work, right? Okay, so to be receptive to ourselves and our own ugliness, right, but in a way that wants to try to see, what do I do with that in light of the rest of my commitments and what I want my life to be like, right? That's authentic receptivity, right? It's not just making my authenticity an excuse to do whatever impulse has come up for me today. Okay. Am I getting close, Father Sean? Where did you go? 2 more minutes before the 22-minute mark. He's an excellent person. Okay. Yeah. The last thing I want to say is just an experience of my own that I've really been thinking about a lot in terms of the meaning of receptivity. And I have 2 wonderful children, and I loved being pregnant. I really, really loved it. And at some point when I realized that was not going to happen again, it was just devastating. I felt so lonely. And I just kind of became consumed with having had this experience of having another person always present, right? And how much I was going to miss that. And just really resisting that reality, but having to contend with, no, that really is the reality. And suddenly just getting hit over the head, right, with God giving me, right, it wasn't in words, but it was somehow given to me, I want to be present in you always, just like that. But you are so busy being upset about what you don't get to do, right, that there isn't any room in there, right? So often for us to really receive what the good gifts that God wants to give us, we have to surrender our own ideas, right, our own desires, right, and make a space that then God can fill even more magnificently, right, than we could for ourselves. If you're like me, you're a control freak and you are convinced, right, that your way is the best way, right? It's not true. I wish it was true, right? But it is not true, right? This is our challenge, is to cultivate the kind of receptivity that Mary has, right? To be willing to ask questions, to be willing to acknowledge something is hard, right? Something is difficult. There are swords spiritually piercing my heart, right? But yet, right, we're all in. So one of the things that I find kind of distressing is when some pious people want to say, well, if you're having a mental health issue, you're clearly just not praying enough, right? You just need to ask for mental healing or something, which, of course those things would help, but to think that there's not also other things that are likely ought to be done, right? I don't know how to deal with this. I should go talk to somebody who's very experienced with these kind of mental health issues and get some input on what might be good strategies for me to use, right? I shouldn't think that I should be able to handle this all alone. It's really important for us to have enough humility to be able to ask for help. And that is itself, right? I mean, one of the things that people have to learn, and some people don't learn it until they're in pre-theology in the seminary, right, is that they don't understand everything easily. And they may need to ask help, right, about what do I do about this, or how do I think about this, or something, right? And so humility is an intellectual virtue. Right? It's the recognition of the reality that I need help, and that somebody else has expertise, right, around this, or more experience, right? I can talk to my mother. I can talk to my friend. I don't have to pretend that everything is okay. That's a virtue, right? To be able to ask for help. Where curiositas is just wants to know things just to know them, right? And it isn't selective about, well, is this the kind of thing that is really worthwhile knowing, right? Do I really need to know whether my neighbor just recycled her draperies, or are those really new, right? No, I really don't need to know that, right? That's just curiositas, right? The trouble with the stuff that has come out of Silicon Valley is in order to keep us clicking on our screens, right, what they really want to appeal to is curiositas, right, because it doesn't discriminate, and it just stays there and actually starts reading the ads, right? Oh, that's sort of interesting. And that led to this, and right, and the next thing you know, right, an hour has gone by, and you have no idea, right, what you've been doing. So we're in a situation where the things are sort of constructed to stimulate curiositas, right? And so we have to be vigilant to some extent. And if we're young people, somebody else has to be vigilant on our behalf to kind of narrow down the opportunity for that, and channel our natural desire to know toward knowing things that are worth knowing. So. I think the first thing that we have to be able to do is listen, and just demonstrate by our listening, right? The fact that we are not immediately jumping down somebody's throat to tell them what their problem is, or to tell them how to solve their problem, right? To really listen to people, and give them a space that they really feel like they're being heard. And then I wish I were better at this, but I think the skill that we're trying to get to is then to be able to ask questions that just elicit more about, well, what is it that you really think would constitute a satisfactory life, right? What is it that you really want? Oh, you want to have good friends. I totally want that too, right? And here maybe are some of the things about the lifestyle that you're currently living that have you ever thought that this might actually be an impediment to real friendship? Just a question. I mean, what do you think? And I think we can find a lot of common ground when we start there. There are other people who are much better at this. If somebody wants to stand up and say something better, please do. But that's kind of my take on it, right? That the silence, we have to cultivate silence also in front of the other and let them, right, say what they need to say. So many people, nobody's ever really let them do that, right? I've been seeing this ad for one of the streaming services, and it says, find your people, right? And they're talking about a channel, right? You're going to watch this channel, and those will be your people, and that will be the place where you are understood, right? And there must have been a focus group somewhere that thought that might be successful, right? That people are so starved for other people that they would actually think a streaming service is going to fill that, right? So our needs are not really that different from anybody else's. It's a matter of kind of paring it down to the simple and getting at that, and then thinking about, well, the church has been thinking about this for 2,000 years and really thinks that, these particular activities are an impediment to that. So I don't know, maybe she's got a point. So I think that just by letting people be real to us, we show, oh no, I'm okay with reality, right? I don't have to invent you into something else, right? I think at a kind of just human level, we have to show, and things like this show, that we know how to have fun, right? We are okay with encountering other people, and they don't all have to look exactly alike, right? And that's how we gain credibility, I think. Yeah. Well, the cool thing about Zechariah, though, is he is silenced, right? And he is mute. And then God does what he says he was going to do, right? And he is incredibly blessed. And then he's able to speak, right? Once John comes around. And if you read the Canticle of Zechariah, right? He has really seen, right? This is all about our mighty God and what he has done for us, and his own vision of himself, right, has really been clarified, and that's why now he can speak again. So I think part of it is also to allow the Zechariahs to change, right? I'm 60 years old, and I'm probably going to change a little bit more, right? In fact, I think I probably better, right? Change is just part of being alive, right? And knowing that God is going to be present in the change, right? Emboldens me, right, to continue to change in ways that incorporate my existing commitments, and also open up new things, right? Well, I think it's really important that we recognize that there isn't a gender spectrum, right? So there are not 52 genders, right? And there are two sexes, but the ways to be properly a woman are myriad, right? There's a spectrum there, right? And the ways to be an authentic man, those also are myriad, right? And most of what we care about and most of our personality traits, right, are largely shared, right? There are just kind of these outlier things that tend to be, that's a manly man, right? But every once in a while you'll run into a woman who has a lot in common with that manly man, but she's clearly a woman, right? And we have to be receptive to that's a perfectly fine way to be a woman, okay? And the same with men who seem to have, are more like the girly girls, right, than the woman who's like the manly man is, right? And that's just part of reality, right, is that we can be very different from each other. I think one of the problems that we've had is this kind of characterizing forms of masculinity as toxic, and in kind of that is something that has been put out there and that I think some men have received in a way that's very destructive to them. So being receptive doesn't mean being a pushover, right? Being receptive properly sometimes means recognizing, well, that's just crazy, right? And that's not coming to me from God. This is not an angel coming to announce this to me. This is popular culture that is basically trying to sell me something, right? And now it's, some kind of lawnmower for my entire body, right? When did that become a manly thing? It's just bizarre, right? So I think that's the balance we kind of have to have. So I would never say to a man, you are just way too receptive, right? There clearly are men who have a lot of effeminate characteristics, right? That's not necessarily a problem. It's if that's not an act that they're putting on because they're trying to cope with something, if that really is, who they are, and if they're integrating that into their life, right, in a way that's healthy and holy, fine, right? Did that?
Yeah, so it sounds like you're just kind of articulating humility as like an openness of our being creatures before God and receiving fundamentally being from God and its nature without kind of determining it ourselves. And this applies across all two genders.
All two sexes, yes. I actually don't think that there are genders at all, but...
All two sexes.
All two sexes, yeah. Both sexes, yeah. Sexual dimorphism, yes. I think in general that's the case, right? But we can't sort of line up a list of feminine Christian receptivity and say that's only going to show up in women and this the other, right? There are these big kind of tendencies, but there will also be people who aren't really fitting right into them. My best example of this is I was talking to some of the missionaries at Christ in the City, and when they go out and encounter the homeless, they go in groups of two and they try to make those a male and a female group. And what they find, but they had never really formulated this until I started talking to them about this idea of feminine genius, is that the woman of the pair would be sitting down with the homeless person, talking to them, finding out all about them, right, in their particularity. And the man would be listening into this and on his phone trying to figure out, okay, what are the various resources that we could access for this person, right? How could we make the system work to the benefit of this person, right? And they were laughing about that because that had been so commonly their experience. But then they also said, but wait a minute, it's really good that both of those are there, right? Because, the woman would be sitting there finding out about his second cousin's brother's, trauma or something, which, might be important, but at some point the missionaries are going to have to go home, and what's this guy going to do next, right? So they really need each other. And I think part of our challenge is partly because of the real oppression of women, right? That historically has happened, right? Part of the movement against that has been to try to just elevate, right, the feminine and over against the masculine. It's a big mistake, right? The genius that's important is the human genius. And the feminine version of that and the masculine version of that are meant to build each other up and to be more fruitful together than either of them is separately, right? And that's true on the biological level for people who aren't pairing off in biological couples. It's also true on the spiritual level, right? That we are more fruitful when we pool the genius. So, yeah. So I do think that there are these general observations that are generally true, but I also think, if you are mentoring a child who is not acting in sex stereotypical ways, but is perfectly healthy, right? Don't mess with it. Let them be. They maybe they will be, the first female violinist, physicist, nuclear chemical engineer. It's really interesting that Jesus decides to leave us with this sacrament where we literally receive him into our bodies. That's really amazing on many levels. And I think that the practice of adoration in helping us to experience the reality of something that someone who's not thinking in a sacramental sense would just be completely oblivious to, that's very good practice in recognizing the reality of the spiritual. So, yeah, I think it makes sense that would be very helpful. And that some of the aspects of reality that we're really most resistant to, adoration might be a good way to begin to become more accepting of those things. Thank you.